Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique of bowing to Buddha and how to relate it to other techniques in the American Kenpo system. So keep in mind two things. This is not a comprehensive list and it's not family groupings. What it is just different avenues to explore in which you can relate this technique to other elements of the American Kenpo system. So let's start out with a concept that many Kenpos have not really heard of before, and that is base pattern recognition. So since many of you haven't heard of it, let's describe what it is. So if you think about humans are very good at recognizing patterns. So for instance, if I was to say 1, 3, 5, 7, you would naturally go 9. So how can we use this innate ability of ours in order to apply to Kenpo? So let's talk about some base patterns. In this case, in this video, we're going to talk through 5 base patterns and how we can then apply them. So let's start out with an easy one. This is where we're going to isolate our bottom from our top or our top from our bottom, depending on how you're looking at it. And we're just going to be using our upper body. This we can call parting wings because parting wings starts that way. We can then take this and say, okay, well, we've isolated the top from the bottom. We can now isolate the right from the left. And that would bring in something like a thrusting salute. Okay, so now we have 2 patterns. So let's move on to another pattern. Let's talk about something where we're just using primarily one hand and we're isolating the other hand. In this case, it would bring in something like a triggered salute. Okay, we're up to 3. Let's get the 4th pattern. Up to now, we've been doing things on this plus type pattern. We can then flip that on its edge and do something like on the diagonals, and that gives us something like a 5 swords, where we're primarily sticking with diagonal lines. And just like we did in triggered salute, we can then talk about just using this hand, but typically on a circular motion rather than a linear motion. And the way we typically do that is by drawing it across a center line and then using it by coming back across that center line. Okay, that brings us something like a leaping crane, because that's what leaping crane does. So now that we have those 5 patterns, let's talk through how this can help us. And in this case, through formulation. By recognizing positions and patterns, we can then learn to extend the technique a little bit better. So let's talk through bowing to Buddha here, where we get to the end. We're getting all the way to here. We get to this position, and now we want to decide what we want to do. So formulation is what we do to do that. But through base pattern recognition, we can then apply that, and then that'll help us easier choose what our options are. So in this case, let's start out with 5 swords. If we look at 5 swords, what does 5 swords do? It does that block, does the chop, does this minor, draws the hand down, and then hits up again. And then obviously we finish up with those 2 chops. Let's apply this to this technique. We're doing that block, just like we did to the top, we moved to the bottom. We're doing that minor, but now instead of drawing it to the low and back, we're doing it to the high, and then we're hitting down. So we're hitting down rather than up. So how does that help us? So if we recognize all that, guess what? We can finish up with that pattern of 5 swords. Okay, so let's take this into leaping crane. So what does leaping crane do? They do that hit across, and we use it. Okay, let's apply this to this technique. So we get that same position again. And now all we need to do is reverse that pattern, rather than down and up. If you notice what's happening here, rather than coming across, we have a vertical center line and a horizontal center line. What leaping crane does is come across that vertical center line and use it. But bowing to Buddha does it on the vertical. So they have the horizontal line and hit. Well, if we reverse that pattern, that gives us something like a Prince of the Tiger. That allows us to get out. Now, you have the 3 patterns left. So we're in that same position again, and now we can do all 3 patterns simultaneously based upon how you're going to look at it. So for instance, let's start out with triggered salute. We look at triggered salute, they're doing the push. What are we doing? We're doing a pin and a push, right? How can we do it here in this technique? In this technique, what we would do is we're going to be hooking that leg and pushing as we step through to take the opponent down. We'll do it at the end. We won't do it at this point. But if you notice, what's happening here is we're just doing the opposite side. Rather than pinning with the left and hitting with the right, we're now going to be pinning with the right and hitting with the left as we step through. Okay? So how is that parting wings? Well, parting wings does the side to side. Well, what's the opposite of side to side? front and back. So that gives us the parting wings pattern. And then we have thrusting salute. So if we look at thrusting salute, what does thrusting salute do? It steps back, kicks, and then heel palms. Well, in this case, we're going to take the opponent down. What are we doing here? We're going to do that hook, we're going to send it down, and we're going to step through. And you would say, well, you only use the top part, but you didn't use the bottom part. Well, as all Kenpo should know, all foot maneuvers can be extended into kicks. Another way to think about that is kicks are just extended foot maneuvers. So if the opponent comes back up, we could have just as easily used this and hit as we step through, and that would give us the true thrusting salute. So how did we relate bowing to Buddha? Well, we did it through base pattern recognition and describe what those base pattern recognitions were and how to accomplish it, and therefore how to extend your technique. So if you want to know a little bit more about this, this could be done through the Kenpo cards and the guidebook to the Kenpo cards. Hope this video helps you understand the American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.